Hey guys, and welcome to my review for The Rings of Power Episode 7, The Eye. So this is it. Season 1 is nearing the end as we go into the last episode. But unfortunately, for me at least, this might have been the worst episode yet. Because in addition to the usual bad writing and subpar acting, I just found it so utterly boring. Maybe even more so than earlier episodes this season. However, thankfully there were still a few moments I could enjoy, with numerous references to the books throughout. Starting with the 5th best moment of the episode, and that was when the Harfoots spoke about Greenwood the Great, a large northern forest just east of the Anduin River. In the books, the earliest known Hobbit ancestors, which included the Harfoot, Stuor, and Fallowhide clans, did indeed live along the Vales of the Anduin, west of the Greenwood Forest. Yet they were not the only peoples to call this region home, as the Second Age saw the rise of the Woodland Realm, led by King Orifer, a noble Sindar elf who lived in the fabled realm of Doriath during the First Age. Surviving the wars, Orifer and his son Thranduil migrated east to the Greenwood Forest, where they met the more primitive Sylvan elves, who took Orifer as their king. In the First Age, Orifer's homeland of Doriath was a hidden realm for much of its history, with their king remaining out of most external conflicts, and similarly, the Sylvan elves were more isolated and violent than many Western elves, preferring to focus on their own affairs while protecting their territory aggressively. Combining these cultures, the Woodland Realm developed into a kingdom somewhat separated from the rest of the elves, rarely leaving their territory or interfering in affairs outside their forest. However, they did not sit out of larger conflicts entirely, as they aided their elven allies during big events like the War of the Last Alliance and War of the Ring. In addition to the elves and hobbits, humans called middlemen populated these lands in the Second Age. Although in the books, the hobbits existed in the Third Age, so the men they knew about in this region were actually the Northmen of Rhovanion, who descended from the middlemen and later on became the Rohirrim of Rohan. Moving on to the number 4 spot, I chose Bronwyn, saying the people of the Southlands will take refuge in Pelargir, an old Númenórean colony. Although these scenes weren't particularly great, I do enjoy these little mentions of important people and places from the books like Pelargir, the Númenórean city of the faithful, a colony founded by those loyal to the Valar and friendly with the elves. In time, Pelargir became a rival to the southern city of Umbar, another Númenórean colony founded by the Kingsmen, those loyal to their royal family and hostile to the elves. However, unlike the show, Pelargir was never abandoned, and when Númenor fell, it became part of the Kingdom of Gondor, becoming the most prominent city of southern Gondor, sometimes in conflict with their neighbors. For the 3rd best moment of the episode, I chose Durin talking about his secret name to Elrond. I'm still not really into the dwarf storyline, though it certainly got more interesting this episode with all that happened. However, despite my reservations, I will say the actors playing Elrond, Durin, and the King are among the better performances on this show. As seen in this episode, both with the emotional scenes between Durin and Elrond, as well as Durin and his father, which were very well done, and I think pretty well represented dwarven attitudes about outsiders versus their own people. As Durin mentioned, dwarves did indeed have names that for the most part were secret, and in fact had an entire language, Khuz'dul, they did their best to keep hidden from the rest of the world. Taught to them by the Vala Aule, their creator, other races knew this language existed, but for the most part, dwarves were unwilling to teach it to outsiders, and instead learned local languages to communicate with their neighbors. However, if certain dwarves befriended and truly trusted an outsider, they might reveal their language, but even in those cases it was difficult to learn. Their Khuz'dul names were considered very personal and rarely spoken aloud, usually only with a spouse, family member, or very close friend. For the 2nd best reference of the episode, I went with the reveal Galadriel actually is married to Celeborn. Okay, so first I'll just say I pretty much hated this scene and this reveal, but I'll get to that later, and for now I'll just focus on the mention of Celeborn, Galadriel's husband from the books, where they have a very different, far more loving and devoted relationship than what's being portrayed on the show. A survivor of the First Age, Celeborn grew up as a Sindar prince in the realm of Doriath, under the rule of his grandfather's brother, High King Eleuthingol. It was there he met Galadriel when she visited with her brother Finrod soon after they arrived in the continent. Falling in love, the two married and lived together in Doriath for a time, before eventually making their way east of the Blue Mountains, where in the Second Age they ruled the realms of Harlingdon and Lake Nanuiel, before living in Eregion, Rivendell, and Lorien. Celeborn and Galadriel actually did go their separate ways for various periods throughout their lives, but this was common among the elves as they were bound to their spouses for all of their immortal lives, and so being separated for some years didn't affect their marriage or commitment to each other. Even so, Celeborn and Galadriel would miss each other after a time, and so one or the other would seek a reunion. Together they had a daughter Celebrian, who married Elrond and became the mother of Arwen the Evenstar. Finally, for the best moment of the episode, I chose the reveal of the Balrog. Again, this is very different than how it happened in the books, but the visual was great, and introducing a Balrog at least means there will be some cool battles and scenes in the future, hopefully. I thought the Balrog waking up because of a leaf was kinda silly, but I think they were referencing how the dragon Smaug was awoken by a small bird tapping a nut against the side of a mountain in the Hobbit movies. In the books, the Balrog awoke in the Third Age because the dwarves kept mining deeper into the mountains searching for mithril ore, until finally he awoke in 1980 TA, after which he killed King Durin VI. The king's son Nine then took up the throne and tried to fight back for the next year, but he too was killed, and so the dwarves fled from their homeland of Khazad-dûm, remaining away for over 1,000 years. If the show's gonna follow this storyline, then I think the Balrog will end up killing the king, allowing Durin to inherit the throne. He'll then defend Khazad-dûm for a while, during which time they could mine mithril for the elves, until eventually the Balrog wins the war and kills Durin as well. So those were my top 5 moments for the night, and while I did enjoy these references, for the most part I was pretty down on this episode. Being so close to the finale, I thought they would at least put some serious effort into these last few episodes, but it's just not happening. There were many things I didn't care for, but among the most noticeable for me was when Galadriel and the boy went off on their own instead of helping the people suffering around them when they first met up at the start of the episode. Then there was the mention of Pelargir as an old Númenórean colony, which confused me because in an earlier episode, during a moment I enjoyed, Pharazôn made it seem like Númenor was only now exploring the idea of colonies and empire. I'm also not sure why Miriel referred to her father as Ar-Inziladun, which was his name and title in the language of Númenor used by those hostile to the elves, whereas he called himself Tar Palantir, which was the name they'd given him up to this point in the show, and which was the title and name associated with those faithful to the Valar and elves. Since she was invoking his name to pledge war against the enemies of the elves, it just kind of felt disrespectful to use that name. I also thought it was odd how they made a big deal about Halbrand being injured and looking like death, only to be fine and riding a horse for a long journey just a few seconds later. However, for me, the biggest criticism stemmed from their treatment of Galadriel and her husband Celeborn. It was already weird and ridiculous that Galadriel was falling for a man who might be Sauron, but I at least thought she hadn't met her husband yet. To learn that she is actually married to Celeborn already and might pursue another relationship anyway is so insulting to her character, I just can't ignore it. I guess they've changed all this from the books, but in the source material, elves, because they're immortal, mate for life, choosing only a single partner to whom they're connected for the rest of their existence. Even if one of them dies, their immortal spirits simply return to the halls of Mandos, where they'll be reborn in a new body. So even if a husband, wife, or both die, they will eventually be reunited, and so are entirely committed to each other no matter the circumstance. This is a fundamental part of their nature, taken so seriously that when Galadriel's grandfather Finwë wanted to take a second wife, the Valar had to have a meeting to figure out if this was acceptable. The reason Finwë wanted this was because his first wife suffered great pain and was so miserable in her physical body she voluntarily ended her life so she could heal and live as a peaceful spirit in the halls of Mandos. Since she refused to return to her physical form, her husband Finwë was condemned to an eternity of loneliness and so sought permission to take a second wife. In the end, the Valar decided that an elf could take a second spouse, but only under exceptional circumstances where the first spouse refused to be a part of the marriage and agreed to never marry again. This is why I found it so unfortunate that Galadriel was so quick to forget about her husband. Even if he did die, which I don't think he did, Celeborn's spirit would still be alive and he might even be reborn into a new body by now. This also made me think they might introduce Celeborn later on for a love triangle of some sort, which I would not enjoy in the least. Yet worst of all these criticisms is the fact that this episode was so utterly boring. About 40 minutes into this episode, I paused it and got up to do housework because that was more interesting than what was happening on screen. Unless the finale is a complete masterpiece, for me this season and show has just been a massive disappointment. So lackluster that with each episode that passes, the previous ones look worse in retrospect because any early promise or potentially interesting moments have been entirely squandered. Overall, I think I'll have to give this episode my worst rating yet with a 3 out of 10. Hopefully, the final episode will feature Adar prominently, because he's still pretty much the only thing I care about. So that's it for my review of The Rings of Power Episode 7, The Eye. What do you guys think? Do you agree with my harsh take, or are you enjoying what this show has to offer? And what do you think will happen in the finale? Let me know in the comments, and like always, be sure to check out my spoiler-free Prelude to the Rings of Power video, as well as my spoiler-filled videos about the Rings of Power, Kingdom of Númenor, and Second Age, which go over all the events of this period in detail. Then there's my Beginner's Guide to the Lord of the Rings, exploring the entire history of this universe in 30 minutes. Links found below. So that's all for now, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx. If you'd like to help the channel, be sure to give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and check out the links below, or else go to patreon.com/CivilizationEx, where you can gain early access to videos, vote on future content, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend.